When I got home from a 6-month humanitarian mission overseas, I expected a pile of mail, maybe some weeds in the yard, and a few annoyed neighbors who'd had to deal with my overgrown hedges. What I didn't expect was a different family living in my house, my locks changed, and my neighbors whispering like they'd seen a ghost. One woman dropped her groceries when she saw me. Another muttered something about resurrecting the dead, and hustled her kids inside. But the real shock came when the HOA president, Karen, took one look at me from her front porch across the street, turned pale, and dropped her iced coffee like she'd seen the devil himself. I had no clue what was going on until she screamed across the yard, "I thought you were dead." That was the moment I realized something deeply wrong had happened in my absence, and whatever it was, Karen was at the center of it. I stood there blinking, still holding my suitcase, the wheels caked with dust from a dirt airstrip in Nepal, when a man I didn't know opened my front door like it belonged to him. A child peeked around his leg. I walked closer, convinced there had been some mistake, maybe an Airbnb gone wrong or an emergency sale I'd missed. Before I could speak, the man said, "Can I help you?" Like I was a solicitor. I replied slowly, "Yeah, this is my house." He looked at me like I was speaking Martian. "No," he said. "This was sold 4 months ago. We bought it from the HOA." "The HOA?" I nearly laughed. "The HOA has no authority to sell property, let alone mine. My name is on the deed." The guy hesitated and called out to someone inside. His wife appeared, clutching a tablet. She pulled up a document with Karen's signature all over it, stamped and notarized. "And the name of the former owner listed?" "Mine." "Next to it?" "A certificate of death." I snatched the tablet out of her hand and stared. It was me, all right. Full name, accurate birth date. Deceased. Official. Even had a fake funeral program attached. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Someone had declared me legally dead, while I was very much alive, and probably still sunburnt. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or scream. But one thing was certain, this was no accident. Karen had declared me dead, faked documents, and sold my home. I stormed across the street to Karen's house, ignoring the gaping neighbors. She didn't even deny it. She stood there smug as ever, wearing a pink visor and watering plastic flowers in her front yard. When I demanded an explanation, she smirked and said, "We tried contacting you. You didn't respond. So the board followed procedure." "Procedure?" I asked. "What procedure involves pretending someone died and selling their house like a garage sale item?" She just raised her eyebrows and said, "Maybe next time check your mail." Then she handed me a sympathy card and walked inside like she'd just given me cookies instead of news that my life had been auctioned off. The next day, I marched down to the county clerk's office. I needed to see my deed, my records, my everything. The clerk behind the desk went pale when I handed over my ID. She tapped her keyboard for nearly a full minute before she said, slowly, "Sir, according to our system, you're legally deceased." I leaned forward. "Do I look deceased to you?" She shook her head, muttering something about updating forms. I asked to see the death certificate. It was official all right, complete with a forged doctor's signature from a non-existent hospice in Ohio. They even used a cause of death. Cardiac arrest, peaceful. I wanted to laugh. I just spent 3 weeks trekking across flooded terrain with malaria-stricken children. The only thing that had arrested was my cell service. The plot thickened when I got to the recorder's office. Karen had filed an abandonment claim on the property, citing community health concerns due to an unmaintained lawn, unpaid fees, and zero communication from the owner, me. Under an obscure local clause, the HOA could seize and liquidate property deemed hazardous or abandoned if unclaimed for 120 days. Apparently, she'd pushed it through while I was still in Nepal. The HOA minutes even included a moment of silence for me and a memorial barbecue. I stared at the paper, blinking. They threw a barbecue for my death. By the time I got back to the neighborhood, the whispers had grown louder. One guy patted me on the back and said, "Glad you're not actually dead, bro." My neighbor Todd from 2 doors down admitted he'd been suspicious, but Karen had assured everyone I'd passed away. She even claimed I left her power of attorney in my will. A will. Now there was a new problem. Apparently, Karen had submitted a fake will, typed, unsigned, and riddled with grammatical errors that would have made my third-grade teacher faint. She claimed I left my home to the HOA for future community enrichment. I nearly fell out of my chair when I saw the phrase, "May my humble home serve the community as a beacon of HOA excellence." I knew I had to get legal help. But first, I had to make sure the people living in my home knew the truth. The couple were nice enough, but understandably confused. They'd paid top dollar, way above market rate, apparently brokered by Karen's niece, who was conveniently also the notary and realtor. It didn't take long to discover the niece had a revoked license in 2 states. I started documenting everything. I took photos, printed records, made digital backup. I even filmed myself standing in front of the house, holding my ID and passport. I wasn't just going to reclaim my home, I was going to bury this HOA with the mountain of lies they'd built. I spent that evening sleeping in the back of my pickup truck, which thankfully was still parked at the community vehicle storage area. That is, until I found out the next morning Karen had reported it as abandoned property, too, and had already filed a request to auction it. I stopped the tow truck with minutes to spare, and had to threaten legal action just to get it released. That was the final straw. Karen wasn't just unethical. She was criminal. She was stealing lives, literally. That afternoon, I filed the first of many reports. I went to the sheriff's office, then the district attorney's office, and finally filed a complaint with the state's HOA Oversight Board. But it wasn't until I called a friend who worked in a federal agency that I realized just how deep this could go. He asked for the documents. I sent them. 30 minutes later, he called me back and said, "Are you sitting down? Because this is way bigger than just your house. Karen's HOA has pulled this kind of stunt before. Elderly homeowners, deployed veterans, terminally ill residents. I was just the first one who came back to fight." That night, I sat in my truck watching the house I built, lived in, and nearly died for become the center of a conspiracy unraveling faster than Karen's HOA-issued wig in a wind tunnel. My home had been sold, my name erased, and my death celebrated with a cookout. But what Karen didn't know was that I was done playing nice. She thought she could bury me. She didn't know I had claws and a shovel. The next morning, I arrived at the HOA meeting 15 minutes early, just in time to catch Karen handing out donuts and acting like the benevolent queen of the neighborhood. She was laughing with a couple of other board members when she spotted me walking in. Her expression dropped like a rock into a swimming pool. Everyone turned to stare. A few gasped. One man actually spilled his coffee on his lap. I walked in calmly and took a seat in the front row, folded my arms, and waited. Karen tried to carry on like I wasn't there, like she was seeing a bad dream in broad daylight. She cleared her throat, straightened her papers, and began with the agenda. First item, HOA budget reallocations. Second item, upcoming community festival. Third item, confirmation of recent property transfers. That was my cue. I stood up and said, "Are we also confirming fake funerals and home thefts today, or is that under new business?" The room went silent. Karen turned red instantly and snapped, "You're disrupting the meeting." I replied, "You're lucky I'm not disrupting it with a team of lawyers and a federal marshal." That got a few surprised murmurs. One of the board members looked at Karen, concerned. She hissed that I was trespassing. I said, "If I'm trespassing in a public HOA meeting held in a public clubhouse funded by my stolen property, then by all means, arrest me." Karen called security. A bored teenager wearing an HOA volunteer badge walked in, took one look at me, and walked right back out. She then tried to argue that I wasn't who I said I was. She actually said I was impersonating a dead man. I stared at her like she'd grown another head. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm standing here breathing, blinking, and wearing a Fitbit that tracked 11,000 steps yesterday. Do I look dead to you? She doubled down. Said I had forged my own identity. Claimed she had documentation proving I was someone else. The meeting erupted into chaos. Neighbors were whispering, some laughing, others looking genuinely freaked out. One older gentleman raised his hand and asked if this was a prank. Karen tried to pivot and claimed I was part of an identity theft ring. That's when I pulled out my passport, my humanitarian ID badge, photos of myself in Nepal, and, just for kicks, my medical vaccination card dated 1 week prior. I laid them all out on the table like a poker hand. Your move, Karen. What happened next felt straight out of a sitcom. One of the other board members asked Karen where she got the death certificate. She froze. Then said it had been provided by an anonymous tip and a hospice center that no longer existed. When asked who filed the abandonment claim, she stammered that it was the board's collective decision. But another board member chimed in that he never saw that paperwork. Karen glared at him like he'd just betrayed the family. She tried to recover by blaming everything on a clerical mix-up and said the whole thing was a misunderstanding. I said misunderstandings don't come with notarized fake wills, forged medical reports, and real estate transactions involving your niece who isn't even licensed. The room went dead silent. I walked out of that meeting knowing I had shaken the tree. Now I had to be ready for what fell out. The next week, I received a letter in the mail from the HOA. It said I was banned from using any community amenities until my status was verified. The same day, I got a parking violation on my truck for being abandoned. This time the HOA had stuck a neon pink sticker on my windshield saying property of HOA in dispute. They were doubling down, refusing to acknowledge I was alive, and trying to wear me down through paperwork warfare. But they underestimated just how stubborn a guy becomes when someone declares him dead and steals his house. Meanwhile, I started digging deeper. I found out that the notary who signed off on my fake will also sign several other questionable property claims involving elderly homeowners. Her name was Cheryl. She ran a dog grooming salon in a strip mall and offered mobile notarization services. I visited her. She greeted me cheerfully until I asked about my death certificate. Her smile collapsed faster than a cake in a microwave. I asked her why she signed a will for a man who was supposedly in another country. She said she didn't remember. I asked if she had ever met me. She said no. I asked if she was aware that impersonating a notary public in a real estate scam could land her in prison. That's when she fake fainted. Right in the lobby. Just dropped like a cartoon character onto a pile of dog shampoo bottles. Paramedics were called. She was fine, of course. But now I had her behavior on video. I sent that to the authorities, along with a list of every document she'd notarized for Karen in the past 3 years. The thread was unraveling. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't slowing down. She posted a letter to all residents claiming I was harassing the HOA, impersonating a deceased person, and that legal action was pending. I responded by mailing copies of my passport and international exit stamps to every board member, stapled to a printout of the funeral flyer she used in the original scam. The flyer included an incorrect middle name, wrong age, and the phrase, "he loved dogs," which anyone who knew me understood was hilarious, since I'm highly allergic. Then came the kicker. I discovered my garage, now locked by the new homeowners, had been completely emptied. My tools, camping gear, generator, even my dad's old war memorabilia were all gone. I tracked down the local pawnshop. Nothing. Then a neighbor sent me a picture. Karen's adult son was driving my truck around town like it was his own. When I confronted him, he said his mom gifted it to him in my will. I said, "Let's test that in court." He tried to drive off, but I had already called a tow truck. The driver had the paperwork and the law on his side. That truck was towed straight to impound, and I left a note on the windshield. "The dead drive better than you." At this point, I'd become the local urban legend. Kids whispered that I was the ghost of the cul-de-sac. Neighbors brought me casseroles and apologized for believing Karen. One woman brought cookies and said she was glad I was back because the HOA had turned into a dictatorship in my absence. But the real bomb dropped when I received a call from the federal investigator I'd spoken to earlier. He told me he'd connected Karen to at least 3 other abandonment cases involving homeowners who were either traveling, hospitalized, or in assisted living. The pattern was clear. Karen had been targeting vulnerable people, forging documents, and profiting through illegal property sales. He asked for everything I had. I sent boxes. Photos, documents, video clips, voice recordings from the HOA meetings, even security cam footage of Karen walking out of my home with a lamp. He said they were preparing to move forward. Charges were coming. This wasn't going to be a slap on the wrist. It was going to be federal. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, real estate crime, all of it stacked like a house of cards. But Karen wasn't going down quietly. A few days later, I came home to find a dead plant on my truck, a mocking note taped to my door saying maybe ghosts don't belong in the living community. I laughed. Karen was still trying to get under my skin. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't just planning to prove her wrong. I was preparing to ruin everything she'd built. The lies, the fake power, the HOA throne she perched on, it was all going to burn. And I was going to light the match. Want justice anymore? I wanted Karen's entire empire to collapse in front of her perfectly manicured feet. I was done playing defense. The gloves were off. I called up an old friend from college, Jennifer, who now happened to be a real estate attorney with a mean streak for exposing HOA corruption. She took one look at my pile of evidence and said, "This isn't a case, this is a demolition project." We didn't waste time. That same day, she filed 3 preliminary lawsuits: fraudulent transfer of property, wrongful death filing, and identity theft. And while we were at it, she submitted a formal complaint to the state HOA licensing board. Karen was about to learn that faking someone's death is a terrible idea, especially when that someone comes back with a lawyer who treats litigation like a sport. But we weren't stopping there. Jennifer and I worked through the night crafting a plan we called Operation Undead Revenge. Our strategy was simple. While the legal machine churned forward, we were going to hit Karen where it hurt: her image. Her reputation as the ever-smiling, passive-aggressive community leader who always wore matching pastel suits and called everyone dear was about to get buried under a landslide of her own paperwork. The first move? Community awareness campaign. I created a website detailing my story, complete with timelines, document scans, and links to public records. The header read, "I'm not dead, but my HOA ethics are." It went viral within a day. Neighbors started coming out of the woodwork. A retired veteran named Hank said Karen tried to claim his backyard tool shed had become a rodent sanctuary while he was away for heart surgery. A single mom down the street said Karen tried to fine her for leaving a tricycle outside, then threatened to have her house condemned when she pushed back. There were at least 7 stories, all eerily similar. Sudden complaints, vague legal notices, and pressure to vacate or pay hefty fines. People were scared to speak out before. But now, with me leading the charge, they were ready to fight. We planned the perfect trap. Jennifer found out Karen was in the process of selling another, abandoned property a few blocks away. The homeowner was elderly and currently in assisted living recovering from a stroke. She had no idea Karen was trying to liquidate her home. We contacted the woman's niece, and with her blessing, we set up a fake buyer, a federal agent posing as an out-of-state investor. The open house was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, and everything was in place. We installed hidden cameras, had law enforcement ready to intervene, and even printed out every piece of damning evidence we had on Karen. The open house was surreal. Karen showed up in a cheetah print blazer, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard thicker than her moral compass. She greeted the fake buyer with her usual charm, offering homemade cookies and a tour of the soon-to-be-renovated community gym. She bragged about her connections, how she could push paperwork through in under a week, and that the HOA had full control of the abandoned properties. The buyer nodded along, taking notes and pretending to be impressed. Then, when Karen sat down to finalize the agreement, he asked her to walk him through the death certificate and power of attorney. Karen blinked. She said, "Oh, it's just a formality." The buyer smiled, stood up, and said, "Then you won't mind explaining that to the people behind me." He stepped aside, revealing 2 federal agents and a uniformed sheriff. Karen froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. One agent pulled out a folder and started reading her rights. The other opened a laptop and played a video. Karen, 2 weeks prior, bragging at a neighborhood party that she could make anyone disappear on paper. It was caught on a doorbell camera. Karen tried to backpedal, stammering that it was a joke, just HOA humor. Nobody laughed. She was escorted out of the house in handcuffs. Neighbors who had gathered out front began cheering. One woman clapped so hard she dropped her lemonade. I thought it was over right there, but Karen had one last card to play. Within 24 hours, she was released on bail. And then she vanished. Just like that. The HOA board claimed they didn't know where she was. Her phone went dead. Her house sat dark. But Karen wasn't the quiet type. I figured she'd show up again, and she did, in the most Karen way possible. A week later, doorbell footage surfaced online. Karen was spotted entering a house on the far end of the community, belonging to a man everyone knew as her tennis coach. At 2 in the morning, in full disguise, wig, trench coat, sunglasses at night, she was caught laughing and sipping wine, clearly not the fugitive she was supposed to be. She also made a fatal mistake. She ranted, loud enough for the doorbell mic to catch, about how she'd fake her own death next time and leave the country before the government could touch her. That video exploded online. Local news picked it up. Then regional. Then national. Karen was trending. Hashtags like #DeadAgainKaren and #GhostOfHOA began circulating. Someone made a remix of her quote and turned it into a dance track. I couldn't make this stuff up if I tried. Still, despite the public pressure, the HOA tried to distance themselves. They claimed she acted alone. The vice president of the HOA, a nervous guy named Lyle, issued a statement saying the board was shocked and deeply concerned and that Karen may have misrepresented her authority. But Lyle wasn't as squeaky clean as he pretended. Turns out, he signed off on at least 2 of the fraudulent property claims. Whether he knew or not, he was involved. We filed another lawsuit, this time naming the HOA itself, demanding full restitution, legal fees, and a complete audit of every transaction Karen had touched. The board was cracking under the pressure. At the next emergency HOA meeting, only 2 members showed up. The clubhouse was packed. Residents demanded transparency. Someone shouted that Karen should be banned from the neighborhood. Another asked if the HOA would refund fines she'd handed out during her reign. A guy in the back yelled, "My grass was never that tall, she just didn't like me." Lyle stood at the podium, sweating bullets. He tried to calm everyone down but tripped over his own words. Eventually, he just left the room, muttering that he needed a lawyer. Meanwhile, my legal case was moving forward. The court accepted our claim, and a judge ordered that the home sale be frozen. The new homeowners were frustrated but supportive. They'd been scammed too. With Karen on the run and the FBI closing in, I finally started to breathe again. For the first time in months, it felt like the tide was turning. I visited my old property. It felt strange standing outside it, like I was a visitor in my own life. The yard was different. The paint color had changed, but it was still mine. I walked around the side and found one of my childhood tree carvings still in the fence. That gave me hope. Later that week, I got a call from the federal investigator. They had tracked Karen's location using a traffic camera hit from a highway hours outside the city. She was in an RV, painted to look like a children's ice cream truck. The agents followed her to a rest stop and waited. When she stepped out, holding a giant sun hat and The day Karen finally appeared in court felt like a bizarre blend of courtroom drama and late-night comedy. The courthouse was buzzing. Journalists were packed outside the steps, swarming the entrance as if a movie premiere was underway. I walked past the cameras with my attorney Jennifer beside me, both of us trying to keep straight faces as we saw Karen being escorted in through the back. She wore a neck brace, dark sunglasses, and held a tissue to her nose like she was the victim. She limped slightly, too, even though no one could recall her ever being injured. Her lawyer, a man who looked like he regretted every career decision he had ever made, was already shaking his head as the judge entered the room. When the charges were read aloud, there was a ripple of gasps and muffled laughter through the crowd. Wire fraud, identity theft, filing false documents, impersonation of a government witness, conspiracy to commit real estate theft, and a half-dozen other charges that made her look less like an HOA president and more like a Bond villain who lost her mind in the suburb. Karen's attorney pled not guilty on her behalf, and then Karen, unprompted, stood up and launched into a monologue about how she had been targeted, how the HOA was being infiltrated by outsiders, and how she had tried to preserve the soul of the community by removing unwanted elements. The judge stared at her, blinked slowly, then politely asked her to sit down before she incriminated herself further. Jennifer leaned over and whispered that the judge wasn't going to let Karen run this circus. And she was right. Over the next several hours, we presented evidence so overwhelming it was hard not to feel second-hand embarrassment for Karen. There were emails from her private HOA address talking about targeting me. There were bank transfers traced directly to her account. There were surveillance videos of her entering and exiting properties she claimed were abandoned. And then came the big one. A surprise witness, Karen's own accountant, a jittery man who had clearly made a deal to save himself. He walked into the courtroom like he was heading to the gallows, sat down, and began describing in painful detail how Karen had funneled money from phony HOA fines into personal vacations, home improvements, and even a community outreach retreat that was really just a spa weekend. He brought receipts, literal receipts, copies of Amazon orders for luxury patio furniture, Airbnb bookings for mountain cabins, even a karaoke machine she bought using the HOA discretionary fund. By the time he was done, the judge had his hands folded and eyebrows raised so high they nearly vanished. Karen's lawyer looked like he was considering switching to real estate law. Karen herself was vibrating with rage, scribbling notes on a yellow pad and glaring daggers at everyone in the room. But the damage was done. The prosecution rested with a mountain of evidence behind them. Our side, though technically not the government's, had been allowed to speak due to the civil lawsuit filed alongside the criminal case. Jennifer stood up and calmly presented the full timeline, from my humanitarian trip to the forged documents, the fraudulent sale of my home, the theft of my belongings, and the public harassment campaign Karen launched against me once I returned. I sat quietly in the back, watching her dismantle the web of lies with precision. Every word landed. The jury was locked in. Then came Karen's defense, or what was left of it. Her lawyer attempted to argue diminished capacity, claiming Karen had been under stress and acting out of paranoia. He even introduced an emotional appeal, bringing up her years of service on the board, the loss of her cat 2 years ago, and her recent battle with vertigo. The courtroom didn't buy it. Neither did the judge. At one point, when the defense argued that Karen thought I was a dangerous imposter, the judge paused and said, while holding up my verified passport, "If this man is an imposter, then I'm the Queen of England." Karen couldn't take it anymore. In the middle of closing arguments, she stood up again and shouted that the whole courtroom was in on the conspiracy, that I was a foreign agent sent to dismantle suburban values, that the FBI had planted evidence, and that the media was brainwashing the community against her. The judge called for order 3 times before the bailiff had to escort her out temporarily. Her outburst made national headlines. Late-night shows ran clip. Memes exploded. A gif of her shouting, "He's not even real," while being dragged out went viral overnight. After a short recess, court resumed. Karen returned, quieter, pale, and no longer wearing the neck brace. The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He reviewed all the submitted evidence again before making a ruling. In a calm voice, he stated that not only would Karen be facing federal prosecution, but the court was also granting full restitution of my property and damages. I would be returned my home, reimbursed for the stolen vehicle and property, and entitled to further compensation pending the outcome of the civil lawsuit. Karen's bail was revoked, and she was remanded into custody pending sentencing. Outside the courthouse, the media went wild. I tried to avoid the spotlight, but reporters shouted questions. One asked if I had any message for Karen. I just said, "The dead don't forget." Jennifer patted me on the back and said the war was over, but the cleanup was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread fast. The HOA board was gutted. Every member tied to Karen either resigned or was investigated. The organization faced a full audit. All fines issued over the past 2 years were frozen, and homeowners began banding together to demand a total overhaul. I helped lead that movement. We formed a new interim council with community-elected members. Our first action was drafting a bill of homeowner rights and stripping the board of unilateral enforcement powers. The community clubhouse was turned into a shared space for events, not enforcement. People started smiling again. Front yards looked brighter. Kids played in the street without being threatened by Karen's old security patrol. But perhaps the most poetic moment came when the government seized Karen's remaining assets, including a 12-acre property she had purchased outside the county. It was supposed to be her retirement haven, a little paradise she had built with stolen funds. The land went up for auction. I bought it, not out of spite but because I had plans. We cleaned up the lot, built a small pavilion, and opened it as a community space called Second Chances Park. We held monthly events, picnics, and even a dog-friendly obstacle course called the Karen Run. People came from all over just to laugh, relax, and remember what the neighborhood used to be before fear and fines ruled it. Karen eventually got sentenced. 3 years federal with another 2 years probation. No early release. No community service swap. She would serve every day of her sentence, just as she had demanded others obey her every command. Her name became a warning sign. People whispered it like folklore. Kids dared each. I never thought the end of this insane saga would feel so quiet. After everything, being declared dead, having my home stolen, going to court, and watching Karen unravel like a dollar store sweater, I figured the finale would involve fireworks, a band, or at least one last dramatic twist. But the reality was simpler, peaceful, which, ironically, made it all the more satisfying. I stood barefoot on my porch sipping coffee, the cool wood beneath my feet reminding me this place was real again, and it was mine. The birds chirped, sprinklers ticked, and the neighbors who once avoided me now waved with genuine smiles. It didn't erase what happened, but it softened the edges. The home I'd built, fought for, and nearly lost forever was whole again. I was whole again. Of course, the scars remained. There were still legal bills, broken trust, and rooms in my house that didn't feel the same anymore. I hadn't been able to recover everything. Some of my father's old war memorabilia was gone for good. My great-grandmother's quilt had vanished without a trace. The garage, once packed with memories and gear, was still half empty. But I reminded myself daily that it could have been worse. I could have come home and stayed dead forever, never knowing what happened, never fighting back, never winning. That thought kept me grounded and focused as the community, slowly but surely, stitched itself back together. Karen's sentencing had been the final nail. The judge didn't hold back. He gave a scathing speech about her abuse of authority, the pain she inflicted on homeowners, and the calculated manipulation she executed over years. He said her crimes weren't only illegal, they were predatory. And the courtroom applauded when he denied her request for early parole. She stared at the floor, her smugness finally drained. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look at her when I left the room. She'd already lost everything. My satisfaction didn't come from seeing her fall. It came from knowing she could never hurt another person again. But even in her absence, her legacy lingered. I made it my mission to make sure nothing like this would ever happen again, not here and not in any other HOA. I partnered with a few other homeowners and attorneys and started what we jokingly called the Resurrection Project. It began with town halls in surrounding neighborhoods, teaching people how to review HOA bylaws, how to identify suspicious clauses, and how to track financial transparency. We had pamphlets, a hotline, and a public database of bad-acting HOA boards under review. Within 3 months, we'd helped reverse 8 illegal property claims in 3 counties. Word spread fast. The media followed. One news anchor even joked that I'd become the HOA Grim Reaper, but for justice. One of my favorite moments came when a woman in a neighboring community approached me after a meeting. She was in her late 60s, soft-spoken, and had nearly lost her condo to a predatory board member who claimed she violated landscaping rules by planting a lemon tree. She told me my story gave her the courage to fight back. She won her case with our help. That's when it hit me. What happened to me wasn't just personal, it had become something much bigger. A ripple that turned into a wave. And I wasn't riding it alone anymore. Back in my own neighborhood, the HOA was unrecognizable, in a good way. After Karen's removal, we rewrote the bylaws entirely. The old system of top-down fines and secret votes was replaced with transparent ballots, rotating leadership, and public financial logs. Monthly meetings became community potlucks. We used to dread those gatherings. Now they were events to look forward to. Neighbors actually got to know one another. The fences between us, literal and metaphorical, started to come down. I even helped a teenager build a bench at the corner park where Karen once threatened to install a fence to keep loiterers out. Now it was a reading corner, shaded, with wildflowers and solar lights. And the best twist of all? Karen's old house went up for sale after the federal asset seizure. It sat on the market for a while, until someone decided to give it a different kind of legacy. A local nonprofit bought the home and turned it into a resource center for homeowners facing HOA harassment or foreclosure threat. They asked me to help design it. I said yes. Walking through that house again, seeing the empty space where Karen once ruled her little kingdom, felt like poetic justice. The space was gutted, painted fresh, and filled with bookshelves, workstations, and laughter. We called it the Welcome House. Its motto was printed over the entry, "You still have a voice." I brought a framed photo to place in the lobby. It was the one taken of me standing in front of my home the day I returned, still dusty and tired, holding my passport like a shield. That image, once a symbol of confusion and grief, had become a badge of survival. Beneath it, I wrote a simple quote: "If they try to erase you, make sure you write your name in stone." As months passed, I got back into old routines. Gardening, fixing up my truck, volunteering on weekends. I took a trip back to Nepal to reconnect with the team I'd worked with. When they heard what happened, they were speechless. One of them said, "Only in America can someone fake your death with paperwork." We laughed. It was true. But it also reminded me how lucky I was to come back and fight. In too many places, people lose everything and never get the chance to push back. I did. And I didn't waste it. But not all surprises had passed. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. I almost tossed it, thinking it was junk. But curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, "You may have won the battle, but don't think the war is over." It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting. Karen. Of course. I laughed. Out loud. Not out of fear, but because even behind bars, she couldn't resist one final act of dramatic flair. I framed the letter. Hung it in my office next to the fake obituary she'd submitted. 2 trophies. 2 reminders. One from a woman who tried to steal my life, and the other from the woman who lost hers trying. I've been asked many times since if I'd go through it all again. If I'd trade the peace I have now for the hell I endured then. My answer is always the same. I shouldn't have had to. But I'm glad I did. Because I'm not just the guy who came back from the dead. I'm the guy who made sure no one else gets buried alive in red tape and neighborhood politics. On the 1-year anniversary of reclaiming my home, the neighborhood threw a block party. Not to celebrate me, but to celebrate us, all of us surviving and healing together. We grilled burgers, danced, and watched kids run through sprinklers. Someone brought a cake shaped like a headstone that read, "Here lies Karen's reign." It was tasteless and hilarious and perfect. I cut the first slice. Later that night, as the stars came out and the lights dimmed, I sat back on my porch and looked out at everything we'd built since. Not just homes or fences, but connection, trust, a real community. The kind no HOA clause or fake will could ever control again. The dead may rest in peace. But the living? We rise. We fight. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to reclaim the life someone tried to steal from us and build something even better in its place.